and I'm here to introduce our speakers. This is about Property Claims 101. They're going to be talking about insurance, how you file claims, the claims process, explain what information the insurance company may request and why, and what the insured can do to assist in the claims process. I think that's the most important part. I wish all of my clients were here. We've got Greg Patterson. He's a CPCU, ARM, AMIM, AIC. I know y'all all know what those mean.
The alphabet.
He's Senior Claims Manager for Property and Inland Marine Division of Great American Insurance. His knowledge of claims consists mostly of first-party builder's risk, commercial property, construction equipment, motor, truck, cargo, trucking, physical damage, and a host of other inland marine coverages. Greg has held various claims positions throughout his 20 years. Brett Lockridge is President and Principal Consultant of Unified Building Sciences, a nationwide construction consulting company, for over 24 years. He's consulted on catastrophic property damage and construction defect losses, helping to assess the cause and scope of damage. Mr. Lockridge has a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Texas A&M and a Doctorate of Jurisprudence from UT. You just switched sides there. He's performed scope and cost evaluations ranging from small losses to hundreds of millions of dollars in damage. These duties have often involved the evaluation of market values and replacement cost, identification of design and construction deficiencies, and a review of reconstruction cost. Mr. Lockridge regularly speaks on topics with respect to property damage, many of which involve continuing education, which we all need.
Hey, thank you. Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and Vanilla Ice fans. Do we have some Vanilla Ice fans in the house? Yeah? Yeah, all right. Very energetic. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. Well, I have a very controversial question I want to ask all of you. So if you have a very controversial response, you just don't want to, blurt it out, that's perfectly fine. Okay, you ready? I can't believe I'm actually asking this question. Do we have any insurance fans in the audience? Insurance fans. We got a few over here. Awesome. Well, folks, my name is Greg Patterson. I am a Senior Claim Manager with Great American Insurance Company. I've been handling and seeing insurance claims long enough to know that I've seen more claims and more issues than Farmers Insurance. And right now, I actually own a pet gecko. I lied. I don't own a pet gecko. Brett, this is going to be a rough crowd. Anyways. Well, and my goal today is, if you're not already an insurance fan, I'm hoping by the end of the session today you are. And if not, I hope that you have some good walk-away points, that if you do have an insurance claim, you know what to do.
That's my cue. I'm Brett Lockridge. I'm President of Unified Building Sciences. I get the privilege of working with great claims professionals like Greg here on first-party losses, builder risk losses, which is why we're here to talk about. Our background is to do the loss consulting, to kind of assist on the claims and claims evaluations. And so that's pretty much what we're here to talk about.
Yeah. So the next 45 minutes is probably going to be one of the more important 45 minutes you're going to have the entire show. And the reason why is you don't know the next time when a contractor might climb up on a roof with a blowtorch. I think it's a good idea to melt the snow and ice off the roof. It's actually happened. All right, these weren't Americans or Texans. I'm not going to name who they were, all right? And you also don't know next, you can't hear me, okay. I can hear myself, is that better? Okay, maybe I'll just hold it. And you also don't know the next time when maybe your geotechno thermo guy is going to show up and fill up the thermocells using a garden hose instead of a hose of a static-free variety. So these things do happen. They are determinative of whether or not your claim's going to be paid, or whether or not you're going to go insolvent if you don't have the correct insurance. You don't understand how the insurance policy works. So our goal today is to share with you some of the ideas of how that policy works and how to file a claim and keep the claims process moving. So before we do that, I'd like everybody to close their eyes. We're going to visualize two types of claims. Okay? Close your eyes. Some of you aren't closing your eyes. All right, close. All right. I want you to think about that you're building a house for Brad Pitt, a 15,000 square foot mansion. It's gorgeous. You've got imported wood, imported marble, all sorts of beautiful things going on in this house. And a guy named Mayhem, you know who this guy is, right? All right. He puts a battering ram on the back end of his pickup truck, backs it up, slams it right into that beautiful, gorgeous door, gets out with his buddies. They go and steal every appliance in that kitchen. He's dragging it across those beautiful floors, all those marble floors that you just installed. And he's laughing as he's driving away. That's scenario one. The next scenario I want you to think about, you're building a beautiful mansion for Madonna in South Florida. And they have this place trimmed out. I mean, trimmed out to the max. The finishing carpenter shows up.
Swap this out for him.
Yeah.
He drives a nail through the wall and hits a supply line joint. Water's gushing everywhere. This is like on the third floor. Water's all over the place. It's a mess. Okay, after we're done crying in a fetal position and sucking our thumbs, what's the first thing we should do in that scenario? You've got a builder's risk policy in place for both houses. What's the very first thing we do? Who here says, let's notify our insurance agent immediately? All right, not too many hands up. I see that. What about the guy who drove the nail, the carpenter who drove the nail through the wall and hit the pipe? Do we notify our insurance agent in that situation, or we just say, hey, buddy, why don't you pick it? Why don't you pay it? What do we do? Notify the agent or not? I would tell you the best scenario in both cases is to notify that insurance agent regardless of fault, because that gives you more options, especially when the contractor is at fault for the loss. The option is this is what you're probably going to get from maybe from the carpenter or maybe his insurance company. All right, they may accept liability right away, or they may not. They might say, well, they might have an argument and say, well, you didn't properly mark the pipes. Maybe he's not responsible, or maybe he's only partially responsible. In those situations, you're a builder, you have timelines you need to meet, and you want to make sure that your claim is handled expeditiously as much as possible. So in those scenarios, the best case to do is let your insurance agent know about it. He or she will then notify the insurance company and make sure and set up the claim for everybody. It's a good option to have, because those claims, even though your own insurance policy might pay for those claims, there is a thing called subrogation. It's a big fancy insurance word. Your insurance company could then retain the right to go against the subcontractor who caused that loss. So I'll try not to do too many fancy insurance terms out there. But the term subrogation basically is the insurance company then steps into your shoes after they've paid the loss, and then they have the right to go against the contractor. And my PowerPoint went out.
Try this.
Oh, thank you. Okay, all these technical issues. This is a much better sounding microphone. Thank you. Okay, so the second thing we want to do, in the case of mayhem, the guy shows up, caused all that damage to Brad Pitt's house. All right, notify the police. Don't wait around. That's kind of a duh thing, but notify the police. Very important. It's actually part of your policy to do that. Make sure they're notified, get that police report number, and when the insurance representative calls you, just have that number handy. Next, I would definitely take a ton of photographs. Take a lot of photographs. How much does it cost to take a photograph in one of these phones, state-of-the-art phones? $0. Zero. Just take a lot of them. Take far-away photos. Take close-up photos. Take as many photos as you can so you can document the amount of loss that's involved.
Yeah, documentation is probably the most critical part because, I mean, frankly, you're going to spend money fixing this stuff. You want to get paid back for it. So whether it be work that you incur yourself, work that you get your subcontractors that work for you to do, that's going to be critical. And keeping track of that information is kind of the bookkeeping aspect that's important in the claims process. So. Kind of a follow-up to that is, in addition to keeping track of the receipts for the costs that you incur to fix the damage, part of the process is going to involve collecting the information of what the work originally cost you to do. The original subcontracts, those are going to be commonly asked for when you have a builder's risk claim. What did it cost the first time? What's it going to cost to fix it again, especially for new work that's just ongoing? And so.
All right, so the next one is when you do get a phone call from the insurance representative, okay, they're going to ask several questions, and they're going to request several documents from you. The very important to have, since we just built this building, is to make sure you have the invoices for things like the appliances that Mayhem stole. You might also have invoicing and contracts for all the hardwood floors that were installed. Those are all very important. And one thing about contracts that you should know about, and I'll get into the term subrogation again, is that some of these contracts actually have what they call waivers of subrogation. And you might want to ask yourself, well, why would you want to have a waiver of subrogation? And I just know that if I was a builder, I'd be wanting to review those contracts very carefully to see if they do have those waivers or not. Because if someone is responsible for that loss, I certainly wouldn't want just to have all the burden on me as my own insurance to pay for everything. I think I would want to allow them to be able to subrogate against those people who are responsible for the losses. So there might be some reasons why you may or may not have something like that, and I think Brett might have some insight into that.
Sure. In the way we look at waivers of subrogation is it changes it more from a project to a general contractor to subcontractor relationship, almost into a joint venture relationship. And while they say, well, that's great, that's how we want to operate, and that's how some of the contracts are set up with some home builders and regular new construction builders, also recognize the ramifications for that, which your agent can discuss with you on how that might affect the premium prices and how it affects the claims process going forward from there as well. So.
And finally, once the claim is submitted into the insurance company, the claims rep is going to assign certain people to come out, like independent adjusters and vendors and such, to help document and measure and calculate what the loss amount is going to be. It's also helpful for you, too, to obtain repair estimates from contractors that you know. And I think not every contractor is equal. There's some contractors who specialize in repair versus original construction and things like that, have more efficiencies, they're a little better off. And those types of contractors are very helpful when you do have a loss, because they understand how to measure it, they know the methods of repair, they're extremely important. So, it's a good idea that even though the insurance company might have hired an independent adjuster or somebody to come out and take a look at the loss, is that you are also engaging in the process by obtaining repair quotes for permanent repairs. Okay, now, you submitted the claim, you notified your insurance agent. Oh, by the way, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to raise their hand by anything I say up here. Just blurt it out. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have. Now, after you've submitted the claim to the agent is going to do a great job by providing a really good description of the loss. And this is extremely important for those insurance agents that are in the audience today. The reason is that the claims representatives at Great American, for example, you have people who've been there for 6 months, and then you've had people there for 35 years. So if you get a claim like, say, the Mayhem loss, right, the guy stealing all this stuff from Brad Pitt's, you want a really good description on that notice of loss. Last thing you want to see is something that says, well, there was a vandalism loss to a home and there were some appliances stolen. You really want to be very descriptive, because
that person who is assigning those claims on the insurance company side is not going to be too sure about whether or not that needs to go to somebody who's been handling the claim for 3 years as opposed to 35 years. So it speeds up the process. More information is always better. It's always key. So once the loss is assigned to the adjuster, they're going to be calling you as soon as possible to get a very good description of the loss. If you happen to have those photographs handy, those are so helpful to have. If you have a measurement of what the amount of loss is, extremely important, very helpful to have, and gets the claim moving in the right direction right away. And then after that adjuster contacts you and they go over the loss with you, then a lot of the times, if they're staff adjusters, people who are, say, working in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I work, they have to hire local people to come out and take a look and meet with you and help you measure the loss with them.
And that's where I come in, and others like me. We get hired to kind of provide an independent look at these things. We work either typically on more larger losses. You won't have consultants and engineers and accountants on your smaller losses. But what we want to do is severalfold. One, we got to usually answer the question, what happened, right? We got to find out what happened, how it happened from that perspective. But what we want to do after that is work collaboratively with the builder to get them back in operation, get them back in the process of building the houses, building the structures and the buildings. So that's that collaborative process. And as part of that, we have to find out how much needs to be addressed and what's the best way to address that damage that's there. That's why your engineers are going to get involved. You got structural issues on a building. You might have a renovation project on an existing building that's handled separately. Well, we need to find out what needs to take place on those buildings, on that part of the structure, on that part of the project, in order to get everything back on track and kind of back to normal as best possible. I'm more on the building consulting side, so I help assemble the costs. Also provide recommendations on when you need outside vendors, outside contractors that may not be part of the original project, but you need somebody that comes up and cleans up after a water loss. You're not going to typically have a drawing contractor already on your existing projects. So usually, whether it be us or the independent adjuster or others involved in the claim process, we can provide some guidance in that respect and kind of help get things addressed as quickly as possible.
It's also an important point out too that these people are independent vendors. Okay, that's why we hire them. We don't want them to be some biased person or somebody come up with some results-oriented, product for the insurance company. We want to know on an independent basis what the damages are, because that's by contract. We have to do what the policy says. Any questions on that? Any questions about independent vendors? Anything like that? No? All right, now let's talk about this is the sexy part of the whole presentation, your insurance policy. All right, so once that claim comes in, the very first thing that claim rep is going to want to know is, are we dealing with covered property or property not covered? Your policy is going to describe exactly whether it's a Great American policy or a Hartford policy or any other policy out there. It's going to describe exactly what the covered property is. And the covered property is going to be described on the policy declarations. So if Brad Pitt's house is 11 Snake Eyes Lanes, that's covered property. So mayhem shows up, he causes the damage at 11 Snake Eyes Lanes, that's covered property. We got through the first step. There's certain things on the policy that is not covered property. And it's actually described in the policy what property that is not covered. Land is not covered. Water is not going to be covered. Contractors' equipment is not going to be covered. And if you have any pre-existing structure or building on just a regular builder's risk policy, it is not covered. Now, if you have a renovation form, there is a renovation builder's risk, then the pre-existing, what they call the usable existing structure, which is the existing structure that's going to be in the end product of the renovation, that's covered under the policy. So very important to understand what's covered and what's not covered property. That's the very first thing that claims representative is going to ask themselves, what are we dealing with? The very second step is that the policy does have conditions. Actually, the policies do have conditions, and everything I described in the first slide to you, that's all part of the conditions. It's the prompt notification, notify the police, take measures to reduce the loss, and cooperate. Just cooperate with the claims representative when they contact you and ask for information. Now, every loss is going to be covered under policy, correct? Not correct. There are exclusions on the policy. So every single claim or every single loss is covered unless there is a specific exclusion that addresses the cause of loss that occurred. That's a step that the claims representative is going to ask. And then the two examples I gave you with mayhem showing up and causing a whole bunch of damage and stealing stuff, that's vandalism, that's theft. Those causes of loss are covered. In the case of the contractor hitting the supply line, that's covered as well. So you have water damage, that's all going to be covered. Certain specific things are not covered, like flood. Flood and surface water is not covered under a builder's risk policy. If you're looking for that type of coverage, you might need to ask or request for an endorsement, a flood or surface water endorsement. Earthquake is not covered. Again, you need specific earthquake coverage for that. Nuclear war is not covered. I think we got bigger problems on our hand if we've got nuclear war and paying insurance claims. But I think there is actually a nuclear coverage out there somewhere. I think someone does cover that. Maybe Lloyd's covers nuclear exposures, and that could be like a leak from a nuclear plant or something like that that quarantines an entire area, for example. Other exclusions might include faulty workmanship. So if you mess something up as a contractor, or your sub messed it up, your insurance policy is not going to pick that up. Liquidated damages. We see that from time to time. We might get a claim and someone's asking for liquidated damages, and contractors know what that is. But for those who don't, if you're scheduled to complete a project within a certain timeline, but you need to extend it, there might be penalties for that. Sometimes we actually see $1,000 a day penalties, but those are usually on large commercial structures that you might find. So those types of things are simply not going to be covered by your insurance. But most things are.
So I love it when he talks about policy language, because then I don't have to speak about anything, because as a consultant, I don't really care what your policy coverage provides. I just try to provide the explanations and answers. So from that standpoint, so as I usually say, those questions are best reserved for the adjuster and the claims professionals that are involved in from that standpoint. So let's talk about valuation and how we approach it from that standpoint. Probably the easiest one is called replacement cost. And that means not what it costs you to replace it, but what it costs you to replace it with like, kind, and quality. Now, it's easy on builder's risk typically because you're going to go back with what you had the first time around. As long as there's not an upgrade involved, it's kind of an easy math to do. It becomes a little more trickier when you're dealing with existing buildings and renovation work, as you mentioned before, because then we have to figure out what like, kind, and quality truly means in that situation. If you had a steel panel roof, you want to go back with copper, we're not going to be able to value the copper as much as we'll value what the steel panel roof was the first time around. And that's from a valuation standpoint how we deal with replacement cost.
And a lot of times for the usable existing structure on the renovation forms that I described earlier, some policies are replacement costs on those usable existing structures. You might find occasionally a policy that will have what they call a functional value to it. And that would be like, for example, you have plaster that's damaged. Well, a functional replacement would be something like a drywall replacement. And you can only imagine the people who want plaster aren't going to be too happy if they get drywall to replace it. So you really need to look at those policies, really need to ask your insurance agent what needs you have and what type of expectations you can get on the valuation of those claims. So a functional value sometimes also includes what they call an actual cash value. And that the functional value sometimes is determined on an actual cash value. And the way you determine that is there is some depreciation that applies on those usable existing structures. And you might have something that's pretty banged up and you're looking for a replacement cost. Well, there's going to probably be some depreciation applied to that. again, these are great questions to ask your insurance agent when you have these types of losses and when you're doing renovation projects. They're going to be very knowledgeable in answering those questions, especially on valuation and what things are covered and what are not covered under the policy. Any questions on replacement cost, functional value, actual cash value? All right, moving on. Contractors' reasonable overhead and profit. All right, this is a fun slide here, guys. You might see something that says this in the policy. We will adjust the loss to new construction on the basis of replacement costs at the time of loss, including the contractor's reasonable overhead and profit. I think 150% is a pretty good overhead and profit. What do you think?
200% is good for me, I think.
Oh, man, it's
I like those kind of margins. If only we all lived off those type margins, it'd be a much nicer trade show. I mean, we'd have at the Ritz-Carlton, even though this is a great place, it'd be even better from that standpoint. Everybody handing out, $500 Gucci gift bags. So
overhead and profit sometimes. Let's talk about it a little bit. Well, what is actually reasonable overhead and profit? Well, I mean, sometimes the overhead and profit is actually going to be in the contracts you might have. You might have a contract for a sale or for a build of a house. It might stipulate exactly what the profit margin would be in that contract. And sometimes it may even have something for an overhead, for example. And overhead items are usually like the office, the home office overhead and the labor that's in charge with some of that. Obviously, the job site trailers. Those are some general conditions, some overhead type items. And then profit. Sometimes the usual standard is somewhere between a 10 and 10 overhead and profit for a combined 20 on the direct costs. Somewhere between 15 and 20 is usually about what the standard is. Now, if you're somebody who builds spec homes and you say, well, I can get more than 15 or 20% profit on these things, then the common question the claims representative is going to ask is, well, can you provide me some of the prior builds that you did? I want to see those budgets and I want to see what the sale price is. And if you can certainly justify a higher margin, well, that would be considered reasonable, and that would be part of the insurance claim. All right, soft costs. Now, we realize that you have more loss involved than just the physical direct loss. Sometimes you have what they have soft costs, which are what they call indirect loss. And you can request or inquire into a soft cost type coverage. And what this actually does is, let's just say on the Brad Pitt home, that was a 1-year bid. That was a 1-year bill. Okay, that's you've budgeted out certain items of your soft costs, and they're enumerated up here for you if you can see them. So, for example, you might have a loan on Brad Pitt's construction of the home, and you're incurring interest on it. Let's say you thought the interest on that loan for 1 year, I'm just throwing a number out there, I have no clue. Let's say the interest you thought would be about $30,000. But because of this claim is now going to turn into 1 year and 2 months. So now you're looking at somewhere between a loss of about $5,000 or so on just the interest on that loan. So those are types of things that are covered under soft cost coverage. It's the expected cost. What's my expected cost? What's my expected time of doing the job? But because of the loss, now there's an increased time of doing the job. And as such, I've got these expenses here: interest on a loan, advertising, realty, taxes, architectural engineering fees, cost to renegotiate leases, recycling expenses, builder's risk insurance premiums. Now my costs have increased another $10,000 because of a 2-month delay in the loss. So those are things that are very valuable. We see those claims from time to time, and they're pretty relatively easily adjusted and measured. Occasionally you might run into a situation where they were already behind, and there might be some analysis involved in the critical path or the scheduling of the loss or scheduling of the build prior up to the claim. So those are things that accountants, engineers, building consultants kind of help out with to identify what those are, to really identify what the claim is that's covered under a soft cost type coverage. Are there any questions on soft cost coverages? All right. So we have other considerations. It's extremely important. the completed value and the need for construction budgets and the limits of insurance. All right, I'm going to introduce a very insurance-y term that's probably going to turn off most of you, but the term is called coinsurance. So coinsurance is one of those things that you really have to pay attention to. Completed value. So what are we talking about, a completed value? It's the cost to actually do the construction of the building. Okay, we're not talking about the land, we're not talking about the water, we're talking the actual build of that structure. And so good builders, just like everybody here, are going to have a really good budget and understanding of what their costs are going to be to build it from the ground all the way up, all the way to the top. So you want to make sure that you have a budget in place, and that when you do purchase builder's risk insurance, that you are purchasing the correct limit that's going to match what's on that construction budget. Let's say you don't. Let's say, Greg, I want to save some money. I just want to insure it for Brad Pitt's house for $1 million, even though I know the construction of it is going to be $2 million. It's probably higher than that in real life if it's Brad Pitt. But let's just say that's what you wanted to do. We're going to save some money. We're going to want $1 million limit on that. Our premiums are going to be a little bit less than they would if we did it for $2 million. And we have a loss. So mayhem comes in and causes a loss. The way this works is that the coinsurance requirement is actually a condition on the policy that says that you are to have a limit of insurance that is equal to the construction of the construction costs. And if you don't do that, you may incur a coinsurance penalty. And a builder's risk policy, typically the requirement is at 100% of the budget of those costs. Okay? So if it's $2 million, you want to purchase $2 million worth of coverage on your builder's risk. Because if we have a claim like we did with Mayhem here, you're looking at only being paid, in this example, for only 50% of the claim. 50% of the claim. That could be tens of thousands of dollars that's coming directly off your bottom line if you don't purchase the correct amount of insurance. Extremely important. That's why you need an insurance agent to really help you out, to understand what the risks are, what the pitfalls are with coinsurance penalties. Extremely important. And the insurance representative is going to ask you for your construction budget when you do have a claim, because they're going to check to see if you have the correct amount of insurance for that specific location. All right, let's talk about when claims go good. Brett, you got a lot of examples when those things go really good.
I think it all comes down to one thing. And as I mentioned before, when we go into these processes on a claims, we try to work collaboratively because ultimately we have the same goal in mind, getting you guys back on track, getting back to you in the business of building buildings and structures and us back on other projects. So that collaborative process extends not just to the collection of information and data. And I also often say, a lot of times time is an asset that is at a premium these days. And to whatever degree those that assist in the claims process can assist you in that time, that's what we're here for. So I say you don't need to catalog it and put it in a spreadsheet if you don't already have it that way for your costs that you've incurred. Let us come over. We'll look at the documents. We'll catalog it for you and put it in the format that they're going to need to process the claim. That's all part of that collaborative process. Oftentimes without that, it's, again, going back to it, that the time process, the time involved in assembling the documents, that's what ends up dragging things out sometimes because there's so many hours in a day. So to the extent that we can assist in that regard, your claims professionals on the losses that you have, don't be afraid to ask. That's my best advice in that regard.
All right, now there are occasions when claims go bad, and generally it looks the opposite of what Brett just described. But let me tell you kind of a story. Right? That probably several years ago in a state far, far away, we had a house burned down. The house was about 95% completed, and it turned out that it was actually an arson fire. It was intentionally set. There are accelerants everywhere. So we had a lot of questions when there's arson fires. During the investigation of the claim, the adjuster handling the claim was getting anonymous phone calls. And you'd be surprised. We get a lot of anonymous phone calls. And this caller was saying, hey, you might want to investigate his partner. Word has that there was a falling out, and he burned down the place, and we can't even find him. He left the state. So we start, asking questions and requiring documentation. And meanwhile, while that's going on, concurrently with that, the claims representative is putting together the claim value. And the insured is presenting information to us for her to do that. So we actually have a dollar value at this time, about a month or so into the claim, where if it's covered, we're going to pay. So what happened was, I think the insured got wind that his partner might be involved, and when there's a partner involved, the claim's would be denied. It would be an intentional fire. It'd be fraud, and it's not covered. Those claims aren't covered. So we asked the insured to sit down with us and swear to some statements under oath. And I guess he became a little suspicious and thought, well, the insurance company's up to no good. They're going to come up with some excuse to not pay my claim. So he didn't show up, and he hired an attorney, which is perfectly fine. You're completely entitled to do that. And after discussing with the attorney for several months, the insured finally agreed. I'm going to sit down and have an examination under oath. He did that, and guess what? We actually paid the claim because we found out that the partner was not anywhere involved. He had a complete great alibi. But this is kind of a good example of just cooperating. If you've got nothing to hide, let's just talk let's talk together, let's figure out what's going on, and we would have been able to pay that claim within a month. And so it actually turned out to be a good example, or a good claim result. The insured was happy, his attorney was happy, we were happy, we just wanted to settle the claim. But that's this, ladies and gentlemen, this is the nuts and bolts of a builder's risk policy. And I know we only had 45 minutes to go through this, and if you have any questions, now's a good time to ask. Does anybody have any questions? All right, so the question is, what if you get a claim adjuster that's not as good as me, Greg Patterson? Well, that's simple. You just call the supervisor. You call your agent too. They're very helpful as well. They understand the situation. And not all claims adjusters are made equal. We do our best to train everybody the best way they can, but we're human beings as well. So if you do have a problem with your adjuster, it's not a problem to call your insurance agent, ask for the supervisor, describe what's going on with the situation, and find a solution to the problem. That's really what it's about. Are we good? Well, listen, I really appreciate everybody showing up today. And if you have any questions you don't want to ask in front of everybody, just come right up after the presentation. I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.